51%. That's how much of the global mobile phone market Nokia controlled in 2007. They sold 463 million phones that year. Their market value hit $250 billion. If you wanted a phone, you bought a Nokia. The brand was everywhere. Teenagers, businessmen, students, grandparents. Nokia wasn't just the leader. Nokia was mobile phones. Then 6 years later, they sold 4 million phones. Market share collapsed to 3%. The company that defined mobile communication for a generation was sold to Microsoft for $7 billion. Not the whole company, just the phone division, the part that made Nokia Nokia. And here's the part that should terrify anyone running a successful business. Nokia didn't lose because they made bad phones. They lost because they refused to believe the world had changed. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Because once you see the pattern, you'll understand why being number one doesn't protect you from anything. Founded in 1865 as a pulp mill in Finland, Nokia spent over a century making paper, then rubber, then cables. By the 1960s, they entered telecommunications. 1982, they launched the world's first car phone for the Nordic mobile network. 1991, Finland's prime minister made the world's first GSM call on a Nokia phone. The company helped create the standards that built the global mobile network. This wasn't luck. This was technical excellence. By the mid-1990s, Nokia made a bet. Sell everything else. Focus entirely on mobile phones. They divested forestry. They sold rubber. They cut cables. All in on phones. The timing was perfect. Europe was deregulating telecom. The Soviet Union had collapsed, opening Eastern markets. Digital networks were replacing analog. Nokia rode all three waves simultaneously. 1998, they shipped 41 million phones and became the world's #1 mobile manufacturer, overtaking Motorola. Their formula was simple but devastating. Build phones for every price point. Make them durable, reliable, cheap. The Nokia 1100 became the best-selling phone in history. Over 250 million units. In developing countries, Nokia didn't just sell phones. They were the phone. Everyone's first mobile was a Nokia. By 2007, Nokia's dominance was absolute. 437 million phones sold. $51 billion in revenue. $7 billion in profit. 51% global market share. The company employed 130,000 people. In Finland, Nokia represented 5% of GDP and 20% of exports. National pride incarnate. The Nokia 3310 launched in 2000 became a cultural icon. Indestructible battery life measured in weeks. Snake pre-installed. Millions of people still remember that phone with genuine affection. It represented an era when phones were tools you owned for years, not gadgets you replaced annually. But there's a specific moment when everything changed. June 29, 2007. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and held up the first iPhone. Nokia's executives watched. They weren't worried. They were amused. Look at this toy. No physical keyboard. Terrible battery life. Costs $600. Runs on a 2.5G network when 3G exists. And Apple has never made a phone. Why would anyone take this seriously? By the end of 2007, Nokia still controlled 50% of the smartphone market. The iPhone, 5%. Nokia was selling half of all smartphones on Earth. The iPhone was a niche luxury product for people with more money than sense. But they missed something critical. The iPhone wasn't competing with Nokia's phones. It was making them obsolete. The game had changed from hardware to software, from devices to ecosystems, from features to experience. And Nokia, the hardware company, didn't see it coming. Let me show you the cracks that were already visible before the iPhone even shipped. Nokia's entire business model was built on something called Symbian OS, an operating system they'd helped develop in the late 1990s for the feature phone era. Symbian worked. It was efficient. It saved battery. It ran on cheap processors. Perfect for basic phones with physical keypads and small screens. But Symbian was never designed for touchscreens. Never designed for apps. Never designed for the smartphone era that was about to arrive. And here's the insane part. Nokia knew this. Their own engineers were screaming that Symbian was outdated. In 2008, Nokia bought full ownership of Symbian Limited, investing billions to improve a platform that was already dead. They spent years and vast resources trying to polish a product that couldn't compete. Meanwhile, the organizational structure was rotting from the inside. Between 1996 and 2000, Nokia's headcount at Nokia mobile phones increased 150% to 27,000 employees. Revenue grew 503% in the same period. Explosive growth, but it came at a cost. To manage that growth, Nokia implemented rigid processes and systems. Short-term performance pressure intensified. Managers found themselves unable to dedicate time and resources to innovation. Everything became about hitting quarterly targets. Launch more phone models. Cut costs. Increase margins. By 2009, Nokia was running 57 different incompatible versions of Symbian across its product range. 57. Each new phone model required developers to rewrite and test entirely new code. Development cycles stretched. Launches delayed. Quality suffered. And the internal culture became toxic. Middle managers knew Symbian couldn't compete with iOS and Android. They saw it. But telling senior leadership felt pointless, even dangerous. So they sent optimistic progress reports upward while struggling with impossible deadlines below. Top management, receiving rosy updates, saw no reason to panic. They pushed harder, demanded faster results, stretched targets further. This created what researchers call temporal myopia. Everyone focused on short-term fixes while ignoring the fundamental long-term problem. Their operating system was dying. Nokia's revenue peaked in 2007 at 51 billion. But by 2008, cracks appeared. For the first time in recent history, Nokia's global market share in mobile devices declined. Operating profits shrank. The company that had seemed unstoppable was suddenly vulnerable. And then Android arrived. September 2008. Google announced the Open Handset Alliance, a coalition of manufacturers building phones on Android OS. Open source, free to manufacturers, easy for developers. Android wasn't just an operating system. It was an ecosystem. Google understood that phones had become platforms. Apps would drive adoption. Developers would build the apps. And Android made development easy. Nokia's leadership made a decision that would haunt them. They launched the N8 in 2010 as their iPhone killer. It ran Symbian 3, supposedly improved. It flopped. The market had moved on. Developers were abandoning Nokia in droves. Why build apps for Symbian when iOS and Android offered better tools, larger audiences, actual financial returns? The app gap became a chasm. By 2010, it was clear Symbian was finished. Nokia needed a new operating system. Fast. They had options. Option 1. Build a new OS from scratch. Nokia had been working on something called MeeGo, a Linux-based platform developed with Intel. Promising technology, modern architecture, but it wasn't ready. Years away from commercial viability. Option 2. Adopt Android. Samsung, HTC, Motorola, dozens of manufacturers were building successful Android phones. The ecosystem was thriving. Developers loved it. Consumers loved it. This was the obvious choice. But Nokia's board said no. Why? Pride. Nokia didn't want to be just another Android manufacturer. They wanted to maintain their identity. Be special. So they chose option 3. Partner with Microsoft. Use Windows Phone. September 2010, Nokia's board made a desperate move. They replaced their Finnish CEO with Stephen Alop, a Canadian executive from Microsoft. Nokia's first non-Finnish chief executive in its history. Alop knew Microsoft. He'd run the Microsoft business division until 2010. He had relationships in Redmond. And he had a plan. February 2011, Alop sent an internal memo that leaked to the press. The Burning Platform Memo. He described Nokia as standing on an oil rig engulfed in flames. The memo was meant to rally the troops, show the urgency, explain why dramatic change was necessary. Instead, it devastated morale and spooked investors. Nokia's share price plummeted. Consumer confidence collapsed. Everyone now knew Nokia's products were obsolete. And then Alop announced the solution. Exclusive partnership with Microsoft. Windows Phone would become Nokia's primary smartphone platform. Symbian would be phased out. MeeGo canceled. All in on Windows Phone. Windows Phone had less than 3% market share in 2011. The app ecosystem was barren. Developers ignored it. There were no users, so developers wouldn't build apps. Without apps, consumers wouldn't buy the phones. Without consumers, developers had no incentive. Classic death spiral. Android was open to everyone. Windows Phone required partnership agreements. Android had hundreds of thousands of apps. Windows Phone had thousands, mostly low quality. Android-powered devices at every price point. Windows Phone struggled in the premium segment where Nokia needed to compete. By choosing Windows Phone, Nokia bet everything on a platform that had already lost the smartphone war. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. 2011. Nokia sold 417 million phones total. But smartphone sales started collapsing. Market share in smartphones fell from 30% to 16% in 1 year. The company lost €1 billion. 2012. Total phone sales plunged to 335 million. 80 million fewer phones sold. Revenue dropped 21%. Nokia lost €3 billion. The company was bleeding. They fired tens of thousands of employees. From 130,000 in 2011 to 86,000 by 2013. The first Lumia phones, the Nokia 80710, launched in late 2011, nearly a year after adopting Windows Phone. The delay killed them. By the time Lumia devices hit the market, consumers had already committed to iPhone or Android. The phones themselves weren't terrible. Some had innovative features. The Lumia 920 in 2012 impressed reviewers with its camera and build quality. But none of it mattered. The ecosystem was dead on arrival. App developers had abandoned Windows Phone. The platform peaked at mid-single digits market share globally. Microsoft threw money at the problem, paid developers to build apps, offered financial incentives. It didn't work. You can't buy developer loyalty when the user base doesn't exist. And consumers won't buy phones that lack their favorite apps. By 2013, Nokia's smartphone market share had collapsed below 3%. The company that once shipped 463 million phones now shipped 4 million smartphones, a 99% decline in 6 years. September 2013. Microsoft announced it would buy Nokia's devices and services business for $7.2 billion. Let that sink in. Nokia's mobile phone division, the part that made Nokia Nokia, valued at $7 billion. The company's peak market cap in 2000? $303 billion. They lost 98% of their value. The deal closed April 2014. Microsoft acquired the Lumia brand, the Asha feature phone line, 8,500 design patents, licenses on 30,000 utility patents, and most importantly, Nokia's manufacturing capacity and employee base. Stephen Alab, who had been Nokia's CEO, moved back to Microsoft as executive VP of the devices group. He received an €18.8 million bonus for selling the company. The Finnish Prime Minister called it outrageous. And then the final betrayal. Satya Nadella became Microsoft CEO in February 2014, right as the Nokia deal closed. Nadella had voted against the acquisition internally. He thought Microsoft was chasing competitors' taillights in a race they'd already lost. He was right. July 2015, barely a year after the acquisition, Nadella announced Microsoft was taking a $7.6 billion write-off on Nokia, $400 million more than they'd paid for it. 7,800 jobs eliminated. The mobile phone business was dead. Microsoft tried to make Windows Phone work. They couldn't. The app ecosystem never materialized. Developer couldn't be bribed into building for a platform with no users. By 2016, Microsoft sold what remained of Nokia's phone business to HMD Global, a company founded by former Nokia executives, for an undisclosed but probably tiny sum. The phones that once defined mobile communication, now made by a Finnish startup selling budget Android devices to Nokia sold markets. The Nokia brand lives on, but it's a shadow. The company that shipped 463 million phones in 2007 shipped essentially zero by 2016. Total collapse in 9 years. So what actually killed Nokia? Let me destroy the 4 most common myths. First, technology. People say Nokia's phones were inferior. Wrong. The Lumia 920 had better hardware than many competing devices. Nokia's cameras were industry-leading. Build quality was excellent. The N9 running MeeGo was actually innovative. Technology wasn't the problem. Timing was. Second, the iPhone. People say Apple destroyed Nokia. Also wrong. By the end of 2007, iPhone had 5% market share. Nokia had 50%. The iPhone didn't kill Nokia. Nokia's response to the iPhone killed Nokia. Nokia could have adopted Android in 2010 when Samsung did. They chose not to. Pride killed them, not Android. Fourth, Stephen Alop. People call him a Trojan horse. A Microsoft plant sent to destroy Nokia from within. Conspiracy theory. Alop made terrible decisions. The Windows Phone partnership was catastrophic. But he didn't cause the underlying problems. He inherited a company already in crisis and made it worse. The real cause was organizational. Nokia succeeded as a hardware company in the feature phone era. Durable devices, low prices, global distribution. They were the best in the world at that game. But in 2007, the game changed. Success in smartphones required software, ecosystems, platforms. Nokia was a hardware company trying to compete in a software world. And their internal culture couldn't adapt. When engineers proposed rewriting Symbian from scratch in the early 2000s, management rejected it. Too expensive, too risky. Shareholders wanted quarterly growth, not multi-year investments. When middle managers warned that Symbian couldn't compete with iOS, senior leadership ignored them. They believed Nokia's brand and distribution would overcome software deficiencies. They were wrong. When Alop announced the burning platform and killed Symbian, he eliminated Nokia's only viable short-term option before having a replacement ready. The transition period between Symbian and Windows Phone created a void. Consumers who might have bought Nokia waited to see what came next. What came next wasn't good enough. By 2011, the pattern was locked. Symbian was dead. Migo wasn't ready. Windows Phone couldn't compete. And Android would have meant admitting Nokia was just another manufacturer. Every option was terrible because they'd waited too long to choose. The company that pioneered mobile telephony, that helped create GSM, that built phones for a generation, couldn't see that phones had become computers. And computers require software. Nokia's collapse wasn't about one bad decision. It was a series of compounding failures. Complacency from success, bureaucracy that stifled innovation, short-term thinking that sacrificed long-term viability, pride that prevented adopting Android, and finally, desperation that led to the Windows Phone disaster. In just 6 years, from 2007 to 2013, Nokia lost 90% of its market value. The company that shipped 463 million phones shipped 4.4 million. From number one to irrelevant. And here's the lesson. Market dominance doesn't protect you. Nokia controlled 50% of the global market and still collapsed. Brand loyalty doesn't save you. Everyone loved Nokia phones. They bought iPhones anyway. Past success doesn't guarantee future survival. Nokia pioneered mobile. They died in mobile. The only thing that matters is whether you can see the world changing and adapt before it's too late. Nokia couldn't. They stood on their burning platform, convinced their brand and distribution would save them, while the flames consumed everything they'd built. By the time they jumped, it was too late. The water had frozen, and they hit the ice at terminal velocity. Subscribe if you want to understand what comes next. Because the Nokia story isn't over. HMD Global still makes Nokia-branded phones. Microsoft learned brutal lessons from this disaster. And the patterns that killed Nokia are playing out right now in other industries. Automotive companies clinging to internal combustion while Tesla dominates electric. Retail giants building bigger stores while Amazon eats their lunch. Media companies protecting cable bundles while streaming destroys them. The pattern is always the same. Success creates complacency. Complacency breeds bureaucracy. Bureaucracy kills innovation. And when the world changes, the former leader becomes the cautionary tale. Nokia was unstoppable until they weren't. And the collapse, when it came, was faster and more complete than anyone imagined. That's the real lesson. When you're at the top, you have the most to lose. And the fall is always harder than you think.